big thing nowadays.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go live. Okay, we're live. This is the actual thing from it. Yes. Stream settings. I think that they can. Yes, because video input is on. If anyone is watching, welcome to the stream. We are going to turn off the sound. Peeps. Okay, I believe we are streaming. I am trying to figure out the input because I would
figure out if they can hear us or not.
Good afternoon. Want to welcome everybody. We'll give it another couple of minutes before we welcome our moderators and get started. Thank you all for coming.
Here, let me actually.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this significant program that we wanted to have about 2 years ago after the wonderful play Anne and Emmett. How many of you were able to see the performance of Anne and Emmett in 2020? Wonderful. And for those of you that were not, when you received the email, and I hope everybody received an email, it could be in your spam folder if you didn't. There is a link to the AnneandEmmett.com website where you can see a synopsis of the wonderful play, which teaches us lots of lessons. My name is Robin Wittenberg Dudley, and I'm a volunteer with the Augusta Jewish Museum. And here today is Leon Maven from, where is Leon? Oh, sorry. Leon Maven, who's on the board of the Laney Museum of Black History, and Jack Weinstein, who is the president of the board for Augusta Jewish Museum. And even though we are young, we are small but mighty. And as we evolve with this new museum for the community, we want to make sure that we work together with the other cultural organizations that are already here, such as the Laney Museum of Black History, because we're all about teaching lessons that have occurred in the past, so that hopefully we will improve our future. And I have Mr. Barry here, who was friends with Jack Steinberg, and he knows when this project began, as others of you do. And it's a milestone moment that we're able to be here today. You should have received several handouts. One is a program for today, which actually spotlights what happened in 2020 with the Anne and Emmett play. It also gives you a description of our two moderators today, which we are very happy to welcome in just a moment. You also were given a flyer for the Augusta Jewish Film Festival. And what is significant about the film festival this year is it has 5 excellent films, including the second film, which is being shown next week, starts January 23rd actually, Shared Legacies. And that is a documentary that was recently made about the African American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance. Because as many of you know, Jews have walked alongside the oppressed for many centuries, and walked alongside Martin Luther King to help with the civil rights movement. And of course, Jews are still very involved with social justice and human rights for everyone. Today we focus on Anne Frank, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and Emmett Till, who was a 14-year-old boy who was murdered in Mississippi simply because he whistled at a white woman, and then he was murdered and his body dragged into the Tallahatchie River. And you'll hear more about that. We also have a bibliography that was prepared by the Augusta Regional Library on resources about Anne Frank and resources about Emmett Till. So please visit the library when you can. And then on the table here, we have some materials for the Augusta Jewish Museum. Also, the Laney Museum of Black History. There is a donation basket if you're so inclined, and we will share the proceeds with both museums. Restrooms are back there. We are asking that you keep your mask on for safety for everybody. And after the program, there is a reception right next door at the Augusta Jewish Museum. And you'll have a chance to talk with the moderators, to see the 7-minute history video of the Augusta Jewish Museum, to take tours of both buildings if you would like, and to ask any questions. Please visit our website, and please fill out your evaluation form that you were also given. If you need a pen, there's pens up there, and clipboards if you need something to lean on. It's very important for us to get feedback about our second Sunday programs so we can make them even better for you. And for those people that are looking virtually, I think we have about 70 people signed up. Most of them are virtual. We would ask that you identify yourselves in the chat, if you would, and to also fill out the link for the online evaluation, which you were sent this morning, along with the videos for Anne and Emmett if you need to view it. With that, I will introduce our moderators. Eugene White from the Aiken NAACP, and Avner Even-Zohar, also known as Captain A, and they will tell you about themselves. Any questions before we get started? As you go along, if you have questions or comments for the moderators, please raise your hand and we will walk the microphone over to you. And thank you so much for coming.
You have a question?
Yes.
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not familiar with this, but I would like to see it.
Okay, if you go to anneandemmett.com, and it is written on that booklet there, you can see a synopsis of the play. If you go to YouTube, there are some full-length videos of the entire play. So that would be the best way to do it. And maybe we hope one day that the Augusta Junior players will perform it again in the Augusta area, but that's certainly the best way to see it. Any other questions? Okay, moderators?
I just wanted to recognize Reverend Larry Fryer is with us. He's chairperson of the Martin Luther King Statue Committee, and also
All right, good afternoon, everyone. These events are wonderful because I think that as we start to bring communities together, the way we do that is through conversation, and hopefully through the course of conversation, and then that conversation can lead into deeper discussion, and then the deeper discussion leads into action. But the coolest part about this is that when we do these sorts of things, we get to meet all sorts of interesting people. And so my co-moderator today, we've only spoken just a few times, but just over in the last few weeks of collaboration, I feel like I've made just a very good friend. So I'm going to introduce him to you, and so afterwards, please show your pleasure in having him with us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce to you a world-class educator who captivates groups, big and small, around the world. He's an enthusiastic and thought-provoking orator who has completed several national speaking tours for the JNF, facilitating discussions about human rights and the human spirit as they relate to the Middle East. And he's a charismatic leader who inspires and energizes students daily. Avner Even-Zohar serves as an associate professor of Hebrew and Israel Studies. He is the recipient of the Achievement Medal for Civilian Service of the U.S. Department of Army for educating U.S. Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps service members on the Holocaust, diversity, human rights, democracy, and the recipient of Teacher of the Year Award. Avner is a two-time awardee of the Dassinger Scholarship for Excellence in Social Studies and the author of over 18 books for kids and adults on leadership, emotional intelligence, and happiness. The books coined him the name Captain Happiness. Avner works to build bridges between the Jewish community, the LGBTQ community, and the African American community. He taught 2 queer Jewish classes at the Harvey Milk Institute in San Francisco entitled Gay, Obey, Queer, Obey. Avner was among the few who graduated with highest honors from both non-commissioned officer and officers training in the Israeli Defense Forces, where he served as an education officer in the rank of captain. Avner volunteers with Holocaust survivors, kids, and seniors through his travels around the world. He dedicates all of his books and volunteer work to his mother, the late Avner Even-Zohar, who lost the battle against cancer in 2012, for teaching him kindness, wisdom, good deeds, and great living. So let's show our appreciation for having Avner here with us today.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I highly appreciate it. Eugene is the current president of the Aiken County branch of the NAACP. Prior to assuming this role, he served 2 terms as the education chair of the branch executive committee. He assumed the presidency with the idea that 3 fundamental tenets of a great society are education, public safety, and business and commercial relations, and he's working to ensure that there is equity for all of those in 3 areas. His guiding mantra as branch president is make it fair for everyone. It is his desire that the Aiken County branch of the NAACP continues to form coalitions with a diverse set of organizations and diverse collection of people to continue civil rights advocacy for all. The Aiken County branch has a rich history of civil rights direct action. Under his leadership, in 2018, the branch celebrated its centennial anniversary and since then has received local, state, and national awards. This places this Aiken County branch as one of the top branches in the nation. Eugene was raised in Aiken County and is a product of Aiken County Public Schools. He is multilingual and holds a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Washington and Master of Business Administration from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. He's an active member of Augusta Aiken chapter of the Project Management Institute, Omega Psi Pi Fraternity Incorporated, and the Royal Aikenians. He was selected as South Carolina Chamber of Commerce 2017 Manufacturing Employee of the Year, the 2019 Award for African American Excellence from the Aiken Center for African American History, Art, and Culture, the 2020 Aiken Standard Person of the Year, and most recently as 2021 Citizen of the Year for both Psi Omega and Sigma Pi chapters of Omega Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated. To summarize, Eugene is a remarkable human being, and I was very delighted to work with him in the last few weeks. I felt that I have gained a friend, and I strongly recommend that you will all interact with him, because if you become his friends, I think you will gain a lot from him. So let's give a big hand to Eugene.
So now we just wanted to do a bit of centering before we get started with our discussion. We're sort of entering in a strange place in that we had the plague 2 years ago, and now we're coming back for the talk back 2 years later, and so lots of time has passed since then. So just as a reminder, and also to honor these great champions during the season. Yep. You wear these masks so much you just forget that you have one that become a part of your face after a while. But again, just to provide some centering, we're just going to give a brief introduction of the lives of Anne Frank and Emmett Till, just to get us started. And so I'm going to turn it back over to, again, my friend Avner, who's going to talk to us about the life of Anne Frank and then some other interesting bits to help us with our discussion today too.
Thank you. So Anne Frank was born in 1921 in Frankfurt. And she died in March 1945. Basically, her family, after being persecuted by the Nazis, ran away from Germany to a place that they thought would be safe, which was the Netherlands. But Nazi Germany kept occupying one country after the other. So they had to go into hiding, and they were hiding for a few years, and they were caught eventually by the Gestapo, the German police, and the whole family was deported, and Anne died in Bergen-Belsen extermination camp. We don't know the exact date. The Nazis killed Jews there all the time, so there was no reason to keep the date, but we assume that she died either in February or in March 1945. Think about it. If she would have survived just 2 more months, then she would still be with us today. And again, just to kind of give you a frame of reference, Anne talks in her diary about Princess Elizabeth, now Queen Elizabeth of the UK. And Queen Elizabeth was born 3 years before her. So if you think if Anne survived, she probably would be in her mid-90s today. Through reading her diary, she was a teenager. One thing that really strikes me, and I discussed it with Eugene, I know for a fact that everybody here in this room, we all used to be teenagers, or we have teenagers in our life, whether as kids or as grandkids. And I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, I was simmered with anger and frustration towards the world. I gave my parents a lot of hard time for no reason really. And then when you read her diary of Anne Frank, she has really all the reasons in the world to be very upset with the world that has been extremely cruel and unkind to her, that really wanted to take her life, yet she's not. It's hard for me to explain what a greatness and a kindness of spirit this little teenager has, that she is so kind towards the world, and she's so optimistic for no reason. It really kind of looked, when I read her diary, and I volunteer with the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, and I was thinking to myself, we live in a world of plenty. We have everything. And so many of us are so upset and depressed, and we have substance abuse and all of that. And people like her really have all the reasons to be extremely angry and frustrated with a world that has been extremely unkind to her and eventually killed her and her family. She's so kind and so amazing. I also wanted to talk very briefly, just to kind of put an historical context about the Holocaust. So when I talk to service members from the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, about the Holocaust, I talk about the uniqueness of Holocaust in world history. These are not things that I came up with. I quote the Jewish philosopher and Reform Rabbi Emil Fackenheim and Professor Deborah Lipstadt, who is actually from Emory University right here in Georgia, and many other scholars, Holocaust scholars. The uniqueness of the Holocaust. First sentence, not all victims of the Nazis were Jewish, but all Jews were victims. I'm going to say it again. Not all victims of the Nazis were Jewish, but all Jews were victims. The Nazis murdered 6 million Jews and all in all 11 million homosexual, Jehovah's Witnesses, Gypsy, and so on and so forth. But with the exception of Gypsies, perhaps, the Nazis wanted to kill all the Jews in the world. So they could not fathom even having one Jewish alive, because one Jewish person alive, because that would hinder their ability to control the world. So while they didn't want to kill all the homosexuals in the world, they wanted to kill all the Jews. So that's for the first time in human history, there was an attempt to exterminate an entire people. And the extermination was for no territorial reasons. The Nazis didn't want to take the territory that the Jews control. They didn't want, it was the extermination for no financial or political gain. It was actually difficult. I mean, according to their distorted logic, it would have made more sense for Hitler to say, okay, I'll win over the war and win over the United States of America and Russia, and then I'll start killing all the Jews. It makes more sense militarily. But no, it was they had to kill the Jews right there, right now. They could not postpone it. And there was no way out for the Jews. Once Jews were determined to be a race, which we're not, but there was no way out. Money could not buy the Jews their way out of extermination. Conversion to Christianity would not help. The Spanish Inquisition basically told the Jews, you may not live as Jews among us. You may live as Jews somewhere else. We're going to kick you out of Spain and Portugal. You may live among us, just not as Jews. If you convert to Catholicism, then that's fine. You may live. The Nazis took this terrible sentence, you may not live as Jews among us, and shortened it and just said, you may not live at all. There was no way out for the Jews. The genocide, Holocaust, was state-sponsored, and all agencies of Nazi Germany participated and gained financially from their participation in the extermination of the Jews. In a way, it was illegal to be Jewish in Nazi Germany completely. You had to be killed, and it was also illegal to help the Jews in any shape or form. So again, that's unique. And another thing, the Holocaust was the largest organized robbery in history, because when you look at the books, many agencies in Nazi Germany did not have a special budget to kill the Jews. So who paid for the extermination? The Jews. With their property, they were using their own property to kill them. Another uniqueness of the Holocaust is the industrialization of the extermination process. Nowhere before, and hopefully after, we have seen such a whole network of extermination camps in Eastern Europe and other camps, slave camps in Europe, Western Europe, a whole system of railway systems that would take the Jews to the gas chambers. It's almost like when I took some leadership classes, they were talking about like TQM, total quality management. And the Nazis took the distorted idea and they say, how can we murder the highest number of Jews for the least amount of money and effort? And that was their guiding principle. And unfortunately, they were very, very successful. Again, we've never seen it before or after. I would also say that a lot of the people who participate in the extermination, they were not particularly sadist, they were ordinary people. They were ordinary people that were mobilized to this job. They had a job, and the job was to kill innocent civilians, and at the end of the day, they would go home and spend time with their families, which is incomprehensible, but this is it. And Elie Wiesel, the famous Holocaust scholar, said that many of them actually had a BA degree, so they were educated. Education did not help to prevent people from committing crimes against humanity. Thank you so much.
Terrible story, and the stories don't get any better as we shift to talk a bit about Emmett Till. So, Emmett Till was 14 years old, living in Chicago, when he went for a summer trip to Money, Mississippi to visit relatives. During the course of visiting relatives in Mississippi, he was out with his cousins, going around town, and we'll get to it a bit more in our discussion, but there's just a set of different rules that blacks coming from the North had to learn to follow as they made their journeys down to the South. And so there's discussion and debate about what rule Emmett actually broke as he engaged with a white woman who owned a store, or her husband owned a store during the time. And so there are different accounts about what actually happened, but we do know that there was a whistle somewhere. And it was perceived that he was whistling and flirting with this white woman, which at the time was a violation of those rules that I talked about earlier. So this 14-year-old, and think about it, you're 14. We've all been 14 before, so think about your mentality when you're 14. Upon being accused of making this whistle, his uncle ran away because he knew what was going to be coming, or great uncle rather. And then the boys went home and didn't say anything because they knew that something was going to happen. Emmett immediately wanted to go home because he knew that he felt there was going to be a storm that's going to be rising. And so a few nights later, and I say nights, a group appeared at Emmett's great uncle's house. No police, or they weren't wearing their badges or operating in law enforcement capacity at that time. But they pulled Emmett from his family, a 14-year-old boy now. Quite similar to a story that we had not too long ago, right? If you remember Ahmaud Arbery. A group of vigilantes take this boy, and then they proceed to give him a horrendous next set of hours. So during the course of those hours, they poke out one eye. 14 years old. They gouge out the other one. They beat him in the most brutal way that you probably can't imagine. 14 years old. These aren't officers of the law, these are vigilantes and thugs because he whistled at a white woman. And so he proceeds to this beating throughout the night, blinded now, and being beat into recognition. Eventually he's shot in the head, tied to a piece of a cotton gin, and then thrown into the river. 14 years old. His whole life ahead of him for whistling at a white woman in 1955, Mississippi. And so a few days later, they find the body. The state of Mississippi boxes him up, sends him back to Chicago with locks on it saying it's against the order of Mississippi for them to open the box. And the mother demands that the box be opened because she wants to see her boy. You can imagine there hasn't been any undertaking service that's being done to the child, his body. So the smell, you can imagine what it's like at that time. Very, very difficult, very, very tough. But she demands that the box be opened so that she can see her son. And the brave part is that during the public funeral in Chicago of Emmett Till, she demands that we have an open casket funeral so that the world can see what was done to her baby. That at the time was quite similar to that video footage that came and went viral after the Ahmaud Arbery killing, because that was, during the technology of the time, putting out a photograph and letting people be able to see, and letting the published word in the magazines go out across the nation now was just as similar as those videos going out and going viral over our social networks now. So it's very analogous to what happened then to what happened today. And then stretching the analogy to the diary that Anne Frank left for us to read today. So all these memories and moments are being processed and being pushed around the world at this time. And so in ending now, before we get into our discussion, that funeral was one of the watershed moments of the civil rights movement. Just as the Ahmaud Arbery murder kicked off this season of social justice in which we're currently living, as we're rethinking about how we deal with community policing and how we rethink social justice and reimagine how we live, work, play, and pray. It's said that Martin Luther King held a rally in protest for the murder of Emmett Till, which the people who murdered him were tried and found not guilty, and because they were free from double jeopardy, they went on and did an interview in which they were paid, which they admitted to actually doing it, and they couldn't be tried again. But Martin Luther King held a rally that Rosa Parks attended, and as she was sitting on the bus that day, she thought of Emmett Till and she refused to give up her seat. And so that was one of the sparks that kicked off the civil rights movement, pushed us through that era of civil rights, and continues to push us today. Very powerful. Now you've all seen in your program kind of what the synopsis of the play really is, and so we had a video that we're going to show you, but you don't need to go into it because you have the words in your program about what the play is about. But basically, it is the meeting of these two souls in a place called memory, in which they have the ability to remember what happened in the past, but also have the special ability to remember what's going to be going on, or actually seeing what's happening in the future as well. So they're living in a space in which they're recounting their deaths and what they went through, and interacting and dealing with the things and the baggage that they brought into this place with them. But at the same time, again, they get to see some things that are happening in the future. And there's one place where Emmett talks about, and imagine seeing, a Barack Obama in the future, which is, so far past where he was at. So they have this special ability now. And so go on YouTube to play if you haven't seen it, and then at least go back and click the link. You can see the synopsis, and you have a very good synopsis in your program today. But what we want to do is, this is kind of the part where we're starting to talk back now. We can have one of those community conversations, which we hope will turn from a conversation to a discussion, and hopefully from action that we can do as we move forward. And so what we prepared is just a series of questions where we're just going to have a conversation and just kind of talk about how we feel about certain things as we ask each other questions. And then as we're dealing with each of the questions, and we'll see how many we get through, which we'll poll our virtual audience to see what's being left in the chat. And then also the folks who are here in person in the room, if you have some thoughts as well, the mic will be open for you to have your say as well. So my point is that it's not us up here just asking questions and you just watching and spectating, but what we want really is a community conversation. We want to know how you feel and how these things and the questions that we ask impact you, and what you might think the answers to a few of these questions are. And so what we'll do now is we'll just kind of start off by asking each other questions, and I think I get the first question, and we'll do a little call and response, and then poll the room, and then also our virtual audience to see what's happening in the chat. So if you have questions and responses, drop those into the chat, and then those of you who are in the room, if you have something to say, we're all family here, don't be shy, slide up that hand so that you can have your say as well. This is a safe place for you to have your say as we respectfully honor the memories of these two great souls. Okay, is that fair? All right, I think I'm on the hot seat first.
Thank you, Eugene. So I wanted to ask you, what is your vision for the relationship between the African American and the Jewish community in the U.S. for years to come?
We start off with the hardest question, right? My vision really is that, we all really get together in unity, because I think time and time again, history has shown us that we really are stronger together, and particularly these two communities, the as we mentioned earlier in the program, the Jewish community has always been great champions of civil rights and social justice, and from the very beginning has been with the African community as we've marched along this path for civil rights. And particularly for the NAACP, not a lot of people know, but many of our original founders of the NAACP were Jewish. And in the very beginning of the organization, it was funded, by Jewish money, people who felt that this was a need and we needed to address this need. And so for years now, because think about the time in 1909, it was tough for a civil rights organization to be able to step forward and go on to public stages. And so just because of colors of skin, the Jews of those days could get into doors that blacks couldn't be able to get into. And so for years, the first presidents of the NAACP were Jewish, and it was probably into the 40s until we really had the first black NAACP presidents. And then when we go into the 50s, some of the first lawyers that Thurgood Marshall was training, ended up being Jews. And so that kinship, was there for a very long time. And even in the mid-60s, our national president of the NAACP for 10 years, was a Jewish gentleman. So the kinship is quite, it's been quite strong. Personally, me and my family, and I'll tell just a story about me, is that back in the 70s, Dr. Ronald White met a young lady named Dr. Andrea Stern, and they fell in love in medical school, and they went to get married. And so before they were going to go and have children, there was a young guy named Eugene that was a baby at the time who came from his parents. And so they wanted to understand, what would it be like to raise a child in a black and Jewish heritage. And so I ended up being the volunteer, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but involuntarily rather, that's the word, of being able to figure out how they were going to raise a child in this culture. And so it wasn't uncommon for me to be at the temple on the Sabbath, for me to be at Seder's, for me to celebrate the high holidays. I have been exposed to the culture very early from a young age, to the point where there's a family story that says that, I was speaking Jewish, or I was speaking Hebrew rather, at 3 years old. So that's just an old family folk tale. But I think that we all need to be together. We're here stronger. And I think that, as we think about the things that are important to us in community, as it relates to economics, as it relates to public safety, as it relates to education, there's lots of work for the African American community and the Jewish community to do as we go forward together. Make sense?
Thank you.
Any comments from the audience about how African Americans and Jews can work together? Thoughts, aspirations, personal stories, personal anecdotes about how the two communities have collaborated? Anything in the chat?
Not so far.
Okay.
Well, I think today's program is certainly a start in keeping the conversation going for the whole community. The African Americans and Jews are important, but there are other minority groups that I think we could work with as well.
So I'd like to make a comment.
Just sanitize it so it's all ready.
Well, I'm grateful being in the community. Our church right on 4th Street, and there was a sign, and I was telling my pastor's wife, my pastor, that I want to get out of the community. And while I have a heritage as far as African American, where my uncle was the South Carolina State NAACP president, James Dahlman, for a couple terms. And so anyways, I've been wanting to go to a line dancing class for us to get out of the community. And so when I went to the line dancing class, and I've also, for 10 years, had converted to Messianic Judaism when I was in DC. And I go to the line dancing class, and there's this woman, Robin, dancing at the line dancing class. And I can't even dance. And I was like, if Robin can do it, I can do it. So she just encouraged me. And so I just seen that. And we had an event, a women's event at our church. We just hosted it. The line dancing instructor just hosted it there, and Robin came. So the little things, to me, is a big thing. That in relationship building, just being able to just, caring for people, and Robin does that. So I'm just so honored that she would invite us to come. So thank you, Robin.
I'll be very brief. There are two things that I and others have faced when we're talking about coming together. There are two things that we have discussed when we're talking about unity and coming together. Two of those problems that I think we need to address and work with. One is fear, the other one is trust. A lot of us fear each other, which was some of the comments of Dr. King. I fear you, and I don't trust you. We've seen so much of that happening in our society today. And until we get over that, we won't unify. I have a bracelet that an organization, Global Race Unity Organization, Martin Luther King Celebration, wears now, is I embrace unity. If we're going to be true to this, then we must work toward it. Another thing is apathy. Some of us just don't care. You stay over there, and don't come around me. I don't care what happened to you. I don't care what happens in your neighborhood. Don't bring it to mind. For instance, I just retired from the alternative school. I tried to get a number of people who look like me and who doesn't look like me to work there, volunteer. They wouldn't because of fear. Then I reached to John Flythe, who's one of our judges. I said, would you come and work with these young people along with me and others? He gladly accepted. But as long as we fear each other, as long as we can't trust each other, that when I pass you, you lock your door of your car. If you fear me because of the color of my skin, or if we are apathetic and don't care, we won't. But this is hopefully a beginning today. Thank you.
Powerful words to follow. Any other thoughts about how African Americans and the Jewish communities can work together? Examples or anything in the chat?
Robin says community and has capitalized unity. Robin Dudley says community with unity capitalized.
I can't follow up after you, Sarah. I've experienced a lot of anti-Semitism in my career, in my workplace, and anti-Semitism, homophobia. I've seen racism, just about everything. And even though there's been a rise in exclusionary politics and ideas in the Jewish community, and a rise in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in general, I haven't experienced a level of solidarity, and I haven't experienced a level of support outside of my friends, my coworkers in the Black community. When I'm experiencing anti-Semitism, when I'm being prejudiced against, it is always my friends in the Black community that are able to understand and support. And when they're going through something and they're not being heard, I'm able to use my position where they're not being heard and they're not being seen And so even when there are these community and structural and legislative roadblocks, on an individual level, I haven't found the level of support, the level of understanding when you can say, I'm going through this, it affects me in this way, and to understand a similar experience and to listen, I haven't gotten that level of support or understanding everywhere else. So I think, like you said, the unit of just individuals understanding and supporting each other is way more important.
For those people on the chat, we are doing the best we can as far as the audio is concerned. Anybody else, the people in the chat ask that you identify yourself and that you speak up as much as you can. So let me,
I'm Jack.
that was Jack. And, okay.
I think I saw another hand.
Remind people to hold the mic up here and maybe take the mask down.
Working through the logistic and technical issues as we navigate doing these things hybrid in this COVID environment. That's something that has unified us all, because it's been amazing to see how different generations have had to adjust to these digital platforms and YouTube and Zoom and that sort of thing as we try to figure out the best ways to do these sorts of things. Any other thoughts about the two communities working together, or thoughts or things before we move on? There's just so much opportunities for collaboration, and I think that when we're looking for these opportunities, anybody or any of the organizations that's represented here, if you need support, or these would definitely be good places to start if there's any issues or if you need help with resolving any issues. Someone else?
Oh, no, I'm just gonna give my name. She want a name. My name is Charlene Thomas, and I'm with United Voices of Outreach Ministries.
I apologize. I know I didn't give him an organization, but I'm Reverend Larry Frank with Global Race Unity Incorporated / Martin King Celebrations.
Yes, we did just get a comment in the chat. Viewer Carol Bentel shared one of their experiences. Says, I work in a clinic on base and someone drew a swastika on my reading poster. And that, let's see. And let's see, we have another viewer that says, we need to make an effort to get to know people different from you and be vulnerable in not knowing. And Carol Bentel says again, the majority of people didn't know what it was or about the Holocaust. And that's what we have so far.
Again, very timely comments, and again, I think this is timely because we're talking about Anne Frank and we're talking about Emmett Till, but we're still seeing swastikas and things that are being, and hateful symbols that are being drawn here in 2022, not in 2021 anymore.
Okay, I see another comment in the chat, and it says education, and that's one of the reasons we're here today. But what we found after the talk back 2 years ago, where over 60 people stayed after the play, and at 10:30 p.m. we cut it off and said, hey, let's go home and pick this up again another time. And of course now it's 2 years later. But we found that the people in the room that knew about Emmett Till did not know about Anne Frank, and that the people who knew about Anne Frank and the Holocaust didn't know about Emmett Till and how he affected the civil rights movement. So I know the Augusta Jewish Museum and the Laney Museum and the public library for that matter, we're all about education, and because if we learn about each other, then we can love each other more and respect each other more and maybe be less apathetic.
Amen. Everyone's dropping gems today. Okay, let's shift gears here, and we'll give our co-moderator an opportunity to respond, and then again, he'll give his thoughts, he'll give his responses about the answer to the question, and just like we did with the last one, if anyone else has any thoughts or comments or anecdotes to go along with what we're going to talk about now, which is going to relate to remembering history and that sort of thing, feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone over to you, and then also drop any comments that you may have in the chat as well, so you can have your say. All right? And then when we'll bring the microphone to you, ensure that you got it close to your mouth and are speaking loudly, and drop your mask and all that stuff so that folks can hear. So this next question to Avner. The concept of memory is very strong in the play. It is the place where Anne and Emmett meet. Currently, the telling of history is being attacked in the form of cancel culture, critical race theory, and etc. Tell us, why is remembering important? What practices have Jews adopted to ensure that we never forget the pains of the past?
So thank you, Eugene, for this question. Again, very, very thoughtful, like all your questions. There's a saying that if we don't remember history, if we don't learn it and study it, we're doomed to repeat it. Judaism is a religion of telling stories. All the Jewish holidays are stories of the Exodus from Egypt, of the story of Hanukkah. It's all about education and telling the story. Unfortunately, actually right after the Holocaust, and more so today, there's a whole movement of Holocaust deniers that have quite a profound following on social media, and people were saying Holocaust deniers actually killed the victims twice. First, physically killing them, 6 million people, and then killing their memory. It's extremely important to remember and to teach and to learn the lessons from history. So in Israel, there is a Memorial Day for the Holocaust. It's about late April or the beginning of May, and a week later is the Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces, and a day later is the Israeli Independence Day. So like in a week, people in Israel have a whole history of like the Holocaust, and what really the Jewish people said after the Holocaust is enough is enough. And literally from the ashes of the crematoriums in Auschwitz and Treblinka, 3 years after that, the state of Israel was established. It's unthinkable. I mean, it could have been thousands of years later that the Jewish state, but no, Jews were like, this is it. We have seen the consequences of being powerless, and we will not be powerless anymore, ever again. And 3 years later, the state of Israel was established. So the state of Israel now remembers it every year. And when there's a Memorial Day for the Holocaust, from the night before, because Jewish holidays are always the night before, there are no movie theaters, there's no music, no restaurants, no cafes. And then at 11 a.m. there's a siren, and the whole state people get off their car on the highways. The whole country stands still to remember the victims of the Holocaust. There's also the International Holocaust Memorial Day, which is the end of January. We gotta give credit to the Red Army and to the Soviet Union for liberating the Auschwitz extermination camp. They liberated it in January 1945, and that's the International Memorial Day for the Holocaust. However, these are the only 2 days in the year. And in Israel, really, the one that is being remembered is the one that is in late April or the beginning of May. The rest of the year is all about building. That is the way to do it. In a way, that's the best revenge. When you talk to Holocaust survivors, some of them were experimented on their bodies by the angel of death, Dr. Mengele, who was fascinated with twins. So he would do all those not medical, really horrific, terrible experiments on women. but miraculously, some of them survived, and they still had the ability to have children. And they say, this is my revenge. They wanted to kill me, and they did kill my father and my mother and all my siblings, but I got married. Sometimes they get married to a Holocaust survivor because that's the only people who could really understand what they went through. And they said, you know, I have 3 kids, and I have 9 grandkids, and I have great grandkids. This is my revenge. In a way, the Jewish way to do it is to constantly build. One day in the year is a Memorial Day, but the rest of it is all about building communities. It's all about education. It's all about being the startup nation and coming up with ways that could help make humanity better. And when you visit Yad Vashem, which is the main Holocaust museum in Israel, which gets all those awards year in, year out for being like one of the best museums in the world by TripAdvisor. So when you go through the new museum is built that you literally go down into and you see all the anti-Semitism, discrimination, the ghettos, and then the extermination. It's very hard for any person to encounter that. But then you go out and suddenly you can look at the Judean mountain and Jerusalem, and you kind of get the feeling that from this horrific experience, something good came out, something that is positive of building a community. And I strongly recommend that you all go and visit it. Of course, they have a website, you can watch it on YouTube and everything, but this is really the idea that, yeah, 1 year you remember all the agony and the pain, but the rest of the year is all about building community, it's all about education, it's all about giving the next generation the tools to make the world a better place.
Kind of like that concept, and that you have those days, you have the one concentrated day of the year when you're remembering, and then the rest of the year you're going and building up to those days. When he was describing the museum, it sounded pretty familiar to me. I don't know if any of you have been to the African American History Museum in DC, but it sounded pretty similar, that you just kind of start off in the basement, and then, you know, as you go through the time, and it takes a long time to get through, but by the time you get to the end of it, you know you're in a new era. So.
Museum in D.C. We were the African American in Washington, D.C. Europe, and I can't remember if that was posted. That's beautiful. It has all the artifacts and everything about history. It's quite complete. It's very fascinating.
I just want to ask a question. It was like, you began your comments. So I want to make sure I heard this is right, because it's important. You were saying about who paid for this Holocaust. I didn't hear that well, and I won't understand what you were saying.
Thank you so much for your question. So in Holocaust studies, scholars look into how this well-orchestrated, well-oiled machine of extermination worked so well. And what they discover is that the Nazis systematically used the property of the victims to pay for their own extermination, which is even more incomprehensible. So many agencies in Germany did not have a separate budget for extermination of the Jews, but they were using money that was taken from the Jews. So in one city after another, and these are cities that we all know in Europe, the Nazis would build a ghetto. So they would tell the Jews, you know, on that specific day, you have to move to a very small quarter of the city where you will be imprisoned, basically. And then the Nazis would then break into the apartments of the Jews that had no way to control those apartments anymore, and either they would sell it to the local population, or they would systematically take the furniture, the plates, to Germany itself. So, and then from the little that was left in the ghettos, at a certain point, the Nazis would say, well, this is the day of deportation, the mass deportation, and they just needed people, number of people, so they didn't look at the structure of a family, a mother, a father, and all the kids. No, they would take the mother. So the mother would be a mother of, and she would have kids who are 5 years old and 3 years old. 3 years old cannot take care of themselves by themselves, but they would just take the mother. The kids would starve to death in the ghetto. So, to go into the extermination camp, they said each person is eligible for one suitcase. You can take one suitcase with you, and they would put the Jews in those cattle cars. And Adolf Eichmann, who orchestrated it for the SS, he was again trying to improve the process through immense cruelty. So the Nazis says that those cattle cars, they could fit 70 people. And Eichmann was like, hey, why 70? Let's put 100 people and put the suitcases in another train car. And he did that. So many people would get to the extermination camp, they would already die. I mean, just from starvation and disease. And then from this one suitcase, people would take what they thought would be their most valuable belongings. Sometimes they would take some religious candlesticks for the Jewish Sabbath. They would take a menorah for Hanukkah. Sometimes they would take prayer books. So even that, the one suitcase from all the property that those people had, even that the Nazis would use Jewish slave laborers to have those gigantic warehouses in the extermination camp, and again, take that from the little that was left to Germany. And of course, as part of the extermination system, the Nazis, in some camps before the extermination, in some others, they would shave the hair of the victims and would use that to stuff pillows. After the extermination process, they would extract teeth and fillings and gold, and would again send this gold to Germany. So they were really trying to take advantage of every economic possibility that they could, with complete disregard to the victims as human beings. So that's what it meant. Thank you.
All right, we have some comments. Okay. We have some comments from the stream. Let's see. Bridget Kendrick says, this is a great start to bridge communities together. The biggest problem is that we don't do enough to understand the different cultures and backgrounds. We all have more in common than we realize. Stephanie Abaddon says, I have heard that white people cannot experience racism. That discounts anti-Semitism as well as hatred towards groups such as LGBTQ and Asian hate. It is not black and white. Please discuss. Bridget Kendrick adds and says, I had an opportunity years ago to visit the Holocaust Museum in DC and left in tears of the harsh treatments during that time, understanding of a different type of racism. Let's see. I think it's TZP Radonsky says, the truth of Black history has been buried and only lately it has been shared with greater community. It's like African-American enslaved people paying for their owners' lives. We must remember and we must learn together and separately. Jan Green says, regarding education, school boards across the nation are dropping study of the civil rights movement and the Holocaust from curriculum. Yes, I apologize. This is also Jan Green's comment about dropping education on the civil rights movement and the Holocaust in schools. Says they want, for lack of a better word, to whitewash truth about the slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights movement. They're running for positions on these school boards in every state. Get involved, run, speak up, and push back. Sarah Damewood says, Jan, that concerns me too. I'm hoping we can bring that education to adults and children alike through living history, museums, storytelling, etc. Thank you.
Thoughts, anyone, about remembering in history? two things, or two parallels that I heard is that when Avner was describing the passage from to the concentration camps and being squished into the what do you call them, cattle cars. It seemed very familiar. It seemed very similar to how the slaves were packed in the slave ships as they were doing the Middle Passage and coming across. So, there's certainly some parallels in the Holocaust and how these groups of people were killed and slaughtered and decimated. Really, when the impacts are taking place, here again today. And the other part, and that lots of people mentioned, but there wasn't quite something that kind of tied all of them together, were museums, right? So we talked about the museum in Israel, and we talked about the one in DC. And so the fortunate part is that we have a museum that's within eyesight that we need to get up and going. And I think that's one of the things that we have, those things that can help us to remember. And we also have a Center of African American History, Art, and Culture in Aiken, and we have the Laney Museum that's just right up the street there. So all these folks and groups are doing their best to preserve these histories so that they can be told, so that we don't repeat them, so that we can remember those souls that have gone on in the past. And so, if nothing else, and some action that we can take is to remember to get behind these museums and these efforts, because these are where the stories are told, and these is where the memories are taught. And these are the ones that are putting together these programs so that we can have these community conversations, which turn into discussion, which ultimately turn into action. So I think that's probably a good way to tie that back to the organization that called this party together. Any thoughts about remembering our history? We're getting close on the time here, so we'll go for about 10 more minutes, and then if we would decide to pick this back up again and try it for a third round, then we certainly can do that, but we'll respect your time, and we'll take about 10 more minutes of discussion.
So my next question for Eugene. Growing up, were you aware of the story of Emmett Till?
That's very interesting, because we had a question in the chat, or a comment in the chat, that talked about how our K-12 education system here in the States doesn't really teach, that part of history, that Black history, where we're talking about the civil rights movement, we're talking about the struggles, and particularly when we talk about slavery, it's taught in a way that it's more of a military economic system as opposed to a system that was used to kill off and enslave a whole group of people. So in my personal education, that if it wasn't for the things that I learned at home from my family teaching that these are the people that were important in the civil rights era, these are the people and the champions, and these are the deaths and the lynchings that occurred, then I wouldn't have known that, because I wouldn't have learned it in school, because it was just taught in a way that, it was almost glossed over, that, almost similar to the Holocaust. I don't remember getting to the Holocaust in the point of history in my U.S. history class, when we're talking about, what were the causes of World War II. It was taught in that way. And so, if nothing else, I think that's probably the cautionary tale, in that, we need to embrace these institutions like the museums, coming to events like these, and then most importantly, coming to the point where, we're going and looking at our school books to ensure that the holistic part of history, is going to be taught. And so, history really is funny, because, there's almost like in our own communities, there's, my side and your side, and, somewhere mixed in there's a varying viewpoint that, is what actually really happened. And so, in looking at our history in our news today, there's so many different points of view from which we tell it. We got to make sure that, if nothing else, we're driving home, how these histories are being taught. So, coming back to Emmett Till now, my experience in learning about Emmett Till was a cautionary tale, in that I, as a Black boy growing up in the South, needed to be careful about how I dealt with white people, because my life might have been on the line. In the Black community, we have something that's called the talk. And I'm not sure that if everyone is familiar with it, but it's a talk that parents have, and this isn't the talk about the birds and the bees. It's a talk that says that if you want to survive in this world and in this encounter, there are certain ways and certain rules that you need to learn to abide by when you're dealing with white people and other people that are different than you. And I remember getting that talk when I was a kid. And so, again, telling my personal story, and we'll try to get to one more question, so I'll do quickly. But during the time when I got the talk, the Dukes of Hazzard was like the hot show that was on television, right? They rode around in the General Lee in the orange car, and it played Dixie. And so we all thought that General Lee was like the cool thing, and we all wanted the General Lee car. But my dad sat down with me on one very difficult Friday night and explained to me that there was a part in history where people that looked like me would be slaves to the people that I went to school with. And it crushed me. Can you imagine being a 6-year-old kid being taught that kind of truth for the first time? But that kind of teaching had to happen like in my house because it really wasn't something that was taught, in our schools. And, Emmett Till and so many others that were lynched as a result of, the actions that were taken from Emmett Till, and then the beatings and the buck breaking and all those things evil things that went on in slavery, those are the lessons that were taught to me. So Emmett Till and so many others, kind of to answer the question, was kind of like the cautionary tale of, what could happen if I don't govern myself effectively. And so, closing and wrapping up now, even in the NAACP, when we're talking to our young people in our youth council, we have a special class that we give, and it's called 411 on the 5-0, which is information on dealing with the police. And that we're teaching our children now, these are the things that you need to do if you want to survive a police encounter. And so these, unfortunately, these are the kind of educations that we have to provide to our children to hopefully help them to survive. And then even as we've seen with the certain murderers that we've seen here recently, you can do everything you can to try to educate your children, and still they may not make it past the encounter to survive it. So it's a sad commentary on the times that we're living in. Any thoughts on that?
My name is Jory Jenkins. Hopefully you can hear me. So I heard what you just said, but my question is, why are we still educating children of color in regards to fear of people of other colors? I'm also a member of the NAACP, so thank you to that political action chair. So I'm also a community activist for the city of Augusta, Georgia. And it just concerns me because I hear what you say your parents taught you. My mother also taught us things like that, but my father also told us how to protect ourselves. A lot of times he taught us how to use guns and different things of that nature. So why are we not educating our children, and why are other nationalities not teaching their children and their families on what's right? Why are we always the ones that have to teach our children how to be safe when people are doing wrong?
But again, you have an answer to.
I mean, whoever want to ask.
I'll talk to that.
I guess I'll start out with a personal story. Your name? Jack. Start out with a personal story. We moved here from Massachusetts in '89. Our daughter was a junior in high school. Her first week in school was really hard here. She went to Richmond Academy. She came home in tears one day. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't understand what it was because she wasn't opening up, and we said, give her time. She'll let us know. Then one day she finally broke open. She said, Dad, when I came into this school for the first time, they told me to take a seat. So I took a seat. And for days, I couldn't figure out why nobody wanted to talk to me. And then somebody finally told me that I was sitting in the black kids section of the school in the classroom. So the blacks didn't want to talk to me because I wasn't black. And the white kids didn't want to talk to me because I sat in the black section. And I'll tell you right now, she didn't learn it at home. I grew up in the 50s in the South. I remember my synagogue getting swastikas on it. I remember cross burnings. I remember things like lynchings. I remember when Colored Town was this area literally across the railroad tracks. And my parents hated that. They absolutely despised that. And I'll tell you why in the 60s, when I was in high school, that Dr. Martin Luther King really appealed to me. And I'm telling you right now, as far as I know today, he's rolling over in his grave. Because he believed in family. He believed in education. He didn't believe in black and white. He believed, look at a person, find their character, and if it's good character, do good things with them. We don't hear enough of that anymore today. We want to paint everything with a this type and a that type. In studying political science originally in school and in college, I learned that when you want to have a dictatorship, that you have to split people up. You got to say, those are the bad guys. When we were talking about the Holocaust, the Nazis knew exactly what they were doing. Exactly. Because they could pit the Jews against the rest of the German population and make them the bad guys. And unfortunately, so many people sat and believed in that. Just like we see today. I'm going to tell you, is also as a retired military guy, 68 to 89, I'm going to tell you that one of the worst things that I hate is the term African American, Russian American, Scottish American. Why in the world can't we just all be Americans again? Now, when I say that, believe me, I absolutely believe that you ought to be proud of your culture. You ought to celebrate your culture. You should share your culture. But I think these names that we put on each other are what divides us. And I think we play into people that would wish us harm by going along with that. Look at people for their character. Their character. And as far as some of the things that I've heard in here today, I would think it would be safe to say, as the Reverend who's left, he said there's a problem with trust and fear. But that's only because we make it that. I guarantee you, there's a lot of crime in the black neighborhoods. But is it all the blacks in the neighborhood? Or is it like 5%? And the 95% really wish it wasn't around. It's not like they promote it. All right? So when we have some of these crazy programs, we really hurt the people that it's happening to mostly. We shouldn't put up with that either. Then all over the world, and I'm telling you, there's no better place than this. And I mean all over. And we just can't keep playing into this hand. We just need to look at each other for our character, for what we do, how we come with our heart, and do the best thing we can. Don't let kids experience the thing our daughter experienced in school. There's no need for that. And I'm telling you, she never saw that in Massachusetts. I'm not to say that there's not that in Massachusetts, mind you, but she never experienced that in Massachusetts. And I don't think it's just because it's the North and the South. I don't buy into that either. Okay? I really think that there's good everywhere, and it's up to us, as you stated, as the minister stated, Reverend stated, that we have to not accept the public line, if you will. We need to look at people as individuals and the character, and then do good things together, regardless. I think it's amazing that that'll catch on. Thank you.
So I was going to read a few things in the chat as Jack was talking. Bridget Kendrick says, I had to explain to my child at 8 how she was being treated differently at a Christian school because of the color of skin when classmates wouldn't play with her because of their parents' teaching. And she also says it's sad that today It's sad that today our kids still have to deal with the teachings of their parents and how early racism is taught. And Valencia says, I agree, we definitely need to push school systems to include the histories of systematically oppressed peoples from their perspective in K-12. Yes, it does start in kindergarten. She also says, but more importantly, ensure that the teachers are qualified to have the sensitive, difficult conversations that may arise. And Jan Green says, I believe a good term for that which the current speaker is referring to is labeling. And Sarah Damewood says, we need to name oppressed groups because we need to raise awareness about their unique history and experience. And Rhea Beth says, bravo. And then there's a message that was retracted. So just like 2 years ago, when at 10:30 at night we said, it's time to close this and continue it, we'll do the same thing here. But I hope that it'll be less than 2 years before we would get together again to continue the conversation. You have an evaluation form. Please complete that and leave it at the desk here before you leave. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, you want to be contacted directly, please put your email on it. How many of you would like to have something like this maybe every couple of months with the community? Okay, that's wonderful. So between Laney and AJM, we can keep this going, and we'll get some other groups in the community as well. And when we leave here, you are welcome to walk right across the parking lot to that small gray building. That is the Augusta Jewish Museum Education Center, where you can speak with the moderators, speak among yourselves, take a look at the 7-minute history video of the Augusta Jewish Museum. And one of our 4 pillars of education is remembering the Holocaust, because 66% of millennials today don't even know what the Holocaust is. 66%. That's the Anti-Defamation League does statistics, other groups do statistics, the U.S. Holocaust Museum, 66% of millennials. And the same thing with, I believe, our African American history is not taught as well as it could be in school. Tell both sides. Don't tear down monuments necessarily, but tell the rest of the story. Oh, okay, I didn't say that. All right. The whole idea is you cannot erase history, but what you do need to make sure is that all sides of history are told. Avner, would you like to say a few words, and Eugene to wrap up?
Go ahead.
So thanks for joining us this afternoon. These things are interesting because you never really, it's like when you get to when you start to peel away with it and you start to get to like the stuff, and the time is up, and we can't sit here all day and really drill into it. It's like whenever I get into these things, it kind of takes a little while for people to warm up, and then by the time we get to it, we can't really finish it off. So the good part is that we can continue this at some point. So looking forward to having you all continue the conversation as we move forward. And then I'm going to pass it over to our co-moderator to close us out.
Thank you for everybody for coming here. Again, I do a lot of research about the Holocaust, and sometimes my friends were asking me when I was in graduate school, why are you doing that? I mean, it's sad, isn't it? And of course it is sad, but the way I look at it is that the most horrific crimes in human history also gave an opportunity to the best of the human spirit to manifest itself. And through the Holocaust, we learn a lot about the righteous among the nations. These are non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. And they get a certificate from the State of Israel. Many of them are in Poland or in the Ukraine. The State of Israel actually provides them with medical insurance. So for them, it's very important, and they have those conditions that you had to save at least one person for free, without asking for sexual favors, without asking for money, and you have people testifying, this person saved my family, and they're really risking their lives, because the Nazis were like, we're gonna catch you doing that, we're gonna exterminate the Jews, of course, but your extended family as well. So when you look at this, and then you look of people who really did above and beyond to save other human beings in the darkest times of history, and I also look at the work of Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning, that actually inspires me in my life and in my work. So maybe if I could say there's one thing that I would tell people, if there's one thing that maybe you can learn from this panel, I would just ask you just the traditional thing: do good in the world. You're already doing it. Just do more. Do 10% more, 20% more. We heard about all those community organizations. They will not exist without us. So you're already here. You're already doing amazing work. Keep doing it. Do more. Bring your neighbors. Bring your families. And let's do it together and just create a better world for all of us. Thank you so much.